4 new members, a very generous committee, and certainly a very potentially potent committee. And we have with us today, I don't know how many of them are with us. Audrey Isaacs, who is new, has sent her apologies, but she'd like a link. Beverly, I see you're here. Welcome. And Seema, I think you're here as well. And Irana, are you here? Not yet, but I'm
Don't see her yet.
But I welcome all of you to the YEL committee, which you will find out is extremely interesting. I also want to say especially hello to Mark, who has been with us forever in various capacities, including a co-chair. And Mark, I think you were way back with the founding of the committee, but tonight and going forward, Mark is going to be our T host, T for technical. And goodness knows I need it, and I'm glad you're here. And as I think I welcomed other, okay, I don't see anybody else who is a non-member. Tonight we have a very interesting program, and we have 2 speakers this evening. Both of them, from their own vantage points, will address the issue of mental health, which every day we see, hear, and read is a growing problem, but it is also growing in the awareness in the public's eye. The problem is no doubt exacerbated by everything else, COVID to say the least, but everything that's going on around us, socially, economically, what's going on, at least in New York, in our school system, and it's having an effect on all age groups, and our younger people, quite young, and up into early adulthood, seem to be particularly affected by it. So our speakers tonight are going to address that issue, as I said, from 2 different vantage points that will come together eventually. Doug, I didn't see you as a guest. You're a non-committee member, so you're guesting with us, and welcome.
Thank you.
Okay. Courtney is going to introduce our first speaker, who I think, is he here?
Yes, he is. So one other thing just for before we get started, which is that Rosa has kindly offered to take the minutes tonight. So thank you, Rosa, for that. On that topic, we're going to be taking a page out of the best practices of the other committees, and we're going to be sending out a schedule assigning 1 person to handle the minutes per month. So you guys will be getting that. If for some reason your month doesn't work for your schedule, that's fine. Just find another member with whom to switch and let us know. So we're going to be doing what some of the other committees have already started to do, which seems to be working well. And lastly, our members will be getting a brief survey from us. We'd like to make sure we have an understanding of everyone's background and area of expertise, as well as a sense of your areas of interest. So the questions are not meant to take a tremendous amount of time. Brevity is completely fine. We just hope that they'll help us shape future topics and let everyone know a little bit more about each other. So with that's the end of our housekeeping. It is my pleasure to introduce our first guest speaker. We're joined tonight by Kevin Dehill-Fuchel, who's Executive Director of Counseling in Schools. So Kevin, thank you for joining us tonight. We're really grateful for your time, especially since I know it's winter break week for schools. So we appreciate you being here on such a busy week. Thank you.
It's my pleasure, Courtney. Thank you. It's nice to be here. I do occasionally have some internet interruptivity at this time of night. So if something starts to get here or something, give me a sign and I'll try to maybe call in, but hopefully we'll hold the connection. I always feel like when that happens, I should adjust the wires somewhere, but there's no wires to adjust, so it doesn't quite work. But thank you. So my name is Kevin Day-Hill-Fuchel. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I'm the executive director of Counseling in Schools, a not-for-profit organization that's been around for 35 years. I've worked in the organization for 27 of those 35 years, and in the last 9 years as executive director. Started as a counselor and social worker in Sarah J. Hale High School in Brooklyn, if anyone knows that school or what was that school, and continued and piloted a program at PS 191 here on the Upper West Side, where I also continue to live. My children went to PS 87 and the computer school, and ultimately both somehow by miracle to LaGuardia High School. So the public schools and raising my children here in the city, as well as my own clinical background, is really, I guess, the vantage point that I wanted to just sort of, share some thoughts around what's happening right now, and some of the bigger thoughts around childhood mental health, and particularly schools and what's happening in schools. And then be happy to answer any questions or sort of speak to any particular kind of concerns or thoughts or questions that may come up, because there's certainly, as the much used word of unprecedented times is there, these are unprecedented in many ways. And so there'll be questions and things that people may be thinking about, but I'd love to hear what they are and see if I have anything to offer to sort of work with you on those things. And I think that's kind of going to be the place where I start in terms of what I think a key right now for child development and child mental health is extra emphasis on communication. There is a dynamic that can happen where we make certain assumptions about what our children's experiences are based on some of the outward expressions that they have, or some of the, sort of indicators that we generally use to think if our children are happy or if they're doing well. And right now is a time to sort of double down on trying to make sure we understand that we're right about those indicators by asking a lot of questions and having a lot of conversation with our children, and being very honest with our children about our own experiences. Part of the unique element of this particular time in growing up in life in New York City is that really our experiences really cut across our age demographics. They cut across some of our other sort of issues that divide us at times. There are still differences between us and how we're experiencing the pandemic and what's going on, but at the heart and the core of it, we're all experiencing something that isn't what we're used to, that's different. Children are going to experience these things in a very, I'm going to use the word primitive, but I don't mean that in a negative sense, in a very fundamental kind of way. They'll expand, and it will vary by age. It will increase. I think of it as sort of a large block feeling that gets more sophisticated or contorted as you get older. As you or fear or disappointment will stay longer, last longer, and feel bigger the younger you are, even when some of your outward, expression of that may appear a little bit different. So I want to just encourage everybody that this is a really important time to be talking with children. From the point of view of what schools are doing around that kind of dialogue, I think it's, schools are, the traditional aspect of schools, the teacher part of schools is having a very hard time maintaining that kind of dialogue with children that they would normally have. If I think about what normally happens inside of a classroom, a teacher is teaching their lesson, but at some point there are really key interactions that happen sort of in between the lesson time. There are key interactions that happen when, the child just asks for the bathroom pass, or goes down the hallway and a teacher says hello, or just some little things that kind of grease the gears of just an interaction that helps someone sort of know who they are and feel present in the world and kind of go through things. So teachers right now are really just for the most part finding themselves only in that content space, and students are experiencing themselves also in a very flat way. So I think, the support systems around the children that are not in the school have an additional responsibility and burden, if you would, to really, speak to that child, communicate, be accepting, be open, and just really find a way to sort of hear what the experience of that child is as they're going through it. Schools, as constructed, are really important centers of communication. They're important centers of connection, places we can all gather. And so communicating back with the school, and I say gather, it could be in a Zoom like this, to get back into information to share with the school in terms of what it is that's going on for a child. Really important. Counselors in our organization, in many other organizations throughout the city, are working extra hard to maintain our contact with students. A lot of, phone calls, Zoom calls. We're sending things out to people's homes. We're sending care packages of snacks and food. We're sending art supplies so kids can do art with us over the computer, things that just try to keep that going. But in our relationship to particular communities in school and children, one of the things I think is really, really important is to find out how that child is experiencing things. Really find out. And there's a whole range. And that's why it's really important to not make assumptions about, well, I know this is a difficult time. It's difficult for everybody, or I can see he or she's not really engaged, or wow, it looks like he had a good time. Go beyond that, and we have to ask the questions. We have to just get down, sort of like, you can't tell from this little box, but I'm a relatively tall person. And when I was working with young children, it was always important to kind of bend down, kneel down, get down on one knee and speak to somebody, where you can really speak to them. And I think that's those kind of very basic things, I think, are really critical to the mental health and development of children right now. It's probably not, you've probably seen the reports, and I've seen things where there is a lot of legitimate concern for what this isolation and disconnect is doing to children and their experience. A report today, and I believe it was the Wall Street Journal, or maybe it was one of the other newspapers, that identified suicide as an increase in suicides over the last year for New York City public school children. And certainly that's something to take as a real wake-up call to say, we have to be doing everything we can to make connections with children, ask them questions and make connections. That's kind of a big picture, kind of 5,000 feet look at things from my point of view. And like I said, I'd be really interested in any questions or thoughts or responses that anyone might have.
Mark, as a newbie, I'm going to throw my newbie card out. What's the protocol for order? I know that Rosa gets first, or relatively high dibs, since she's taking the minutes. Was there another order that we should go in for questions? I'm sure people have a lot.
That courtesy that was entirely the authorship of then co-chair of YEL and now board chair Stephen Brown. So which I fully endorse, but can't take credit for. So yes, Rosa would be the appropriate first person to give the credit for it. And then after that, I think it's chair's privilege. So go as you will.
Perfect. Rosa, do you have questions? And then I see Robert as well.
I haven't thought of any, but I wonder how this is the same question I ask at every YEL, every HHS. How are you addressing people who speak other languages? So, students who may not have English as a first language, are there resources for them? Are they being attended to in any way? Obviously, mental health is across languages, but I know there are probably many students who aren't necessarily fluent in English. So I just wonder about that. Thanks.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, as an organization, we have people who speak many languages. There is also in the Department of Education a translator hotline that we use. So if there's a particular language that's not in our organization's, sort of staff, we'll use that number. They will connect us to someone of a particular language and do the translation. There is, when you do that, you need to have it gets charged to the school that the child goes to, but it's always worked out. And so that's a way that I know that we're working with it. And there are specific community-based organizations that are paying particular attention to certain immigrant groups that are very focused on those groups and some of the language barriers that are a part of that group's experience. So those would be the two ways that I think that would be addressed. But certainly, I think when it comes to being able to be understood, or someone who's working through a language barrier when you're working through the technology at the same time, that is certainly an obstacle that's appropriate to identify and think about how we can, effectively overcome it. It's both through just the language, but it's also then becomes sort of a cultural piece around the language. It's not just the words, but it's sometimes how we do things. So some things, like people talk about eye contact, or how you show yourself, or what types of things are visible in the spaces that we are when we're working remotely. Those are things to all be considered and think about when we're going to make that kind of contact, knowing that we have to reach across and speak into and connect with the culture of the person that you're working with.
Just one more thing. How do you get that information out to students who don't speak English? Is there like a reach out of any form? And that's it. No more questions. Thank you.
Which you mean the translation information?
Yeah, just like how would if I were a, I don't know, native Spanish speaker and didn't know, how would you get to my mom, let's say, to say, hey, we have this resource available to you? Maybe that's, I don't have any kids, so I don't know how that works with public school. Maybe people who are parents know that, but I'm just curious myself.
Yeah, it would be on the school level, that the school itself would be aware, would be aware of that and make that connection.
Great. Blanche, do you have any questions for Kevin? I think she's still muted. Well, maybe, Blanche, do you want to unmute if you have other questions? We'll come back. Robert, what about you? I saw your hand up first. You were the first one out of the gate.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you. And I just want to say that it's really smart to combine the two committees, Health and Human Services and the Youth Committee. And especially when it comes to the theme of mental health. And this is something that we've addressed in the past on in the Health and Human Services Committee, and it was on our agenda for the next few months and so on. So this is a perfect opportunity, I think, for us to get at this critical matter. And so my two particular areas of interest, one is longstanding, and that's suicidality among young people, because I've always found it kind of a hidden kind of eruption that no one really talks about or reports on too much. The vast number of children that either have attempts or actually succeed in suicide, okay? And that just even clinically, you get some reports on services available in different areas. And I had been in contact with St. Luke's Hospital, which has a very strong, this is 2 years ago, Kevin, which has a very strong unit there to work with young people and violence prevention and all of that. But we went and we probed that, and but you don't get the sense of this is my point, I guess, that it's a public health issue. Mm. And to me, it is a public health issue. So that now with the pandemic, which is aggravating every condition, that is out there, I really wonder, how bad, how much worse has it gotten, and what are the numbers? And one of the things that I've complained about is that I don't see a sufficient number of intervention programs that are really out there in the street and aggressively attacking this with these young people. And especially with the homeless population. And we've looked at that and the different cohorts of the homeless population and all that. It's just absolutely awful. So that I really wonder, with respect to the work that you particularly do through your agency, what you're seeing on suicidality among young people. Then there's another area that it's seemingly all of these issues are related, but they seem to be separate issues. And the other one is, I'm learning this recently from my friends who work in the school systems and that are grappling with this remote learning thing. We're talking about young people, whatever the age, the class for the 11 and 12-year-olds, is that IS or whatever, the middle school or whatever it's called. So I asked my dear housekeeper, I says, because she has the twins and they're in middle school, I says, well, how are the girls doing in their classes? She says, they skip class half the time. I says, well, they're home. She says, and they're Zooming, they're on the computer doing something all day. Well, half these children are skipping class in Zoom. So that's another development that I think has just created more and more chaos. But those are the two particular areas, Kevin, that I have a special interest in.
Thank you, Robert. I think that, I'll start with the suicidality question, and I don't have specific statistics, but we certainly saw, particularly at the very beginning of the lockdown last year, we saw a dramatic and immediate increase in that. And it was at that point, even the part that was a little bit scarier at that point was that hospitals weren't taking kids in because hospitals had COVID cases, and there were certain hospitals that didn't want anybody who wasn't with COVID in the hospital. And so there was a lot of work that had to be done to create networks. And, the city has created a very good network through their hotline. NYC Well is the hotline number. And it really is effectively connected to the mental health resources in the city and the hospitals, and knows exactly where the beds are available and where they're not. And so if someone calls and is looking to refer somebody who's who has the need for that kind of support, NYC Well is doing a nice job of getting people where they need to be to get the help. But that doesn't speak to your first part of the question, which I think is suicide as a public health issue. And I think it's such for any person, but certainly for a young person, to come to that point of hopelessness in their life or to see no other alternatives. It's really a combination of a breakdown in a lot of different systems in our society. So to that degree, I think in the public sphere, to have it addressed and spoken into is really appropriate in the ways that we're all coming together. At Counseling in Schools, we have this sort of framework around a lot of the work we do, and think about schools as places, and we measure success in the work that we do with children by the degree to which they're hopeful. And so we think of schools as places that are there that can offer healing and hope. But hope is really, if you're working on a mental health measurement tool, that's where we want to be. If someone feels hopeful about their life, and then they feel like they have a future, then they feel like there's things worth learning or things worth doing. If you don't feel hopeful and you're just going through the motions, that's a really important indicator of concern from what types of choices that person might make, either to hurt themselves or others. It really is important that we maintain hope, and that's one of the things over the long haul of this pandemic that's really wearing on kids. And I mentioned before that I think children, and it's just easy to lose track of, I think, at least for me it is, that these smaller people are experiencing these things in sort of simpler terms, but in a way much more durable. I mean, I have a lot of resources to try to contextualize what's happening and position, and I've been through, we lived here through 9/11, and we lived through Sandy, and we've lived through other types of large traumas, and I can think about, if I hold on long enough, we'll get through this. for someone who's only been alive 11 years, um, and wasn't here for 9/11 or didn't know about, wasn't really conscious of Sandy, or these things didn't hit their community. Like this can feel like, all there is. This can feel like that thing that isn't going to ever end. And that sets something else in motion. And that's where I'm saying that the idea is so important for us to have a conversation. What are you thinking about? What are you feeling? When you can get those thoughts expressed, then I can offer context. I can offer other ways to think about that. We can try to think, find those pieces of hope where we can start to interject that in our own dialogue. If I'm a counselor with a child, or as my child as a parent, or in the community setting, and whatever it is, it's that conversation that is so critical, so that child doesn't sit with that feeling, just gets bigger and bigger and doesn't move. And it could be something that to us that you don't even realize. It could just be disappointment that, their birthday came and went, and yeah, we did the best we could with a party on Zoom and whatever, but this was the year they were going to have all their friends over, or this was that, they didn't get that special cake or whatever it was. And that thing's just sitting there, getting heavier and heavier and heavier, and becomes the thing that ultimately weighs them down. And if you don't ask, and if you don't inquire, you're not going to find out. So that's the piece on that. But the suicide question, Robert, I think is important. I do think that the city schools have implemented or made available to every teacher in the city, as available to take a course, an online course through the University of Chicago on how to engage around trauma response, about responsive trauma engagement with children. It's really an excellent course. It's very basic. You don't have to be a clinician or anything like that. But every single educator can log into this. At first, it was only there through December, and then University of Chicago extended it. So our schools really do have frameworks and equipment to sort of understand and help adults and children understand the impact that these things are having on them. I'm sorry, Robert, I got kind of caught up in that, and I forgot what your second question was.
No, certainly I appreciate that information, certainly about this this course at the University of Chicago. The second area was this, I don't know, you would still we'll have to use the classroom language, so that the classroom behavior.
Oh, right, the attendance and the classroom behavior, the engagement.
The kids, they're in the house and they're in the computer, but
right.
And the class is on, and they're just not there, So what's happening? What are you hearing on that? What are the reports that are coming in from those teachers?
It varies by grade, and it varies. The middle school through high school is really tough to keep that engagement. The sweet spot is sort of your, third through fifth grade, probably, where there's more ability to keep people engaged. They're just starting to learn things. They're a little bit more exciting. The reading is happening, things are happening, and it's a little bit more engaging on a daily basis. The older kids, as they get older, what's going to hold their attention? And this is a major issue, It's why I think they're not, the testing protocols have changed and other things have changed, because there's just, and you're hearing people talk on an educational level about what's happening with, what's going to need to happen when schools finally do reopen, sort of make up for some of these losses, because it's just, it's very, very difficult. It takes a lot to hold the child into that experience. One of the things that we try to offer parents and children when we work with them to keep that engagement is to try to create very predictable schedules throughout the day, so that, and again, it's a little easier when you're younger, and you can try to have kids master it when they get older, but do the same things at the same time every day. And vary it maybe every Monday, meaning, and then maybe Tuesday is different and Wednesday is different, but have a schedule for each day that becomes predictable, and somehow weave in there something that's going to be, sort of an incentive at the end, or an incentive when you get past that one hurdle to the next one, because it's a lot. I mean, it's just a lot to sit in, to sort of have this experience for that many hours with material that you don't feel confident in, that you're just trying to learn. It's an awful lot to ask of anybody to stay with. So I think that it is a big issue. And the only thing I have to offer on that is just try to implement schedules.
I think Julian was the next hand up. So Julian, thanks.
Thank you, Courtney. And thank you for Mr. Dahill for coming and presenting. This has been really insightful. I'm a senior at Stuyvesant High School, so I'm experiencing some of this now, and I'm very privileged and fortunate to have access to devices and socialization at home, and to be a senior already in high school and sort of have those networks and supports, already in place. But mental health has been a really big discussion at my school in the past weeks, and the student government's been doing a lot of advocacy around it. We did a survey of over 1,000 students, and 80% of them said that their mental health has deteriorated. There's so many issues at play here, and I guess I have so many questions, but the one question I'd be really interested to hear from you, since you've done work in schools and outside of schools, we're trying to navigate this ecosystem of how do we work with parents, with teachers, with students to create change. We're lacking. I really like how you refer to them as key interactions, like a student just asking a teacher for a bathroom pass. We're lacking those so much. We're lacking community building. We have we're one of the only schools that has all students with cameras on and this like participation in class. But there's so many stresses that are preventing things from going well. Teachers worry that we don't have enough time for the curriculum, and so they're rushing and assigning more work. Students at the same time are staring at a screen 6 hours a day, have to help their family business out, are dealing with death in the family. So many issues at play here, and every action that we try to pose gets met with a counterbalance. Can we decrease homework? No, because then students will fall behind on academics. Can we increase community building at the start of class? No, because we'll lose class time. So there's all these the sort of trying to navigate how do we create change, and we're also dealing with issues like Rosa said, with language and parents not being able to communicate with counselors and with teachers. We're dealing counselors that's the other issue. Counselors at our school have this unique position where they can support students, but they don't have a relationship with teachers that can really. So I'm rambling at this point, but I'd be really curious to hear like sort of your thoughts on how as a school ecosystem you can navigate change in terms of creating these support structures for students within the classroom, especially because I know there's so many great support services outside of it, but I feel like unless it's brought into the classroom, there's so many students who I think don't learn about them or know how to access them.
Thank you, Julian. I think you articulated sort of this rock and a hard place scenario pretty well. I guess my top line reaction is just two things. I think balance is just really important, and to really think through, if you're trying to think about change, like what are the critical values that feel more important at this point than tasks. Tasks are not going to be lost, and you guys are all checking your lists off on doing the tasks. What are the things that you all value together, and what are the ways that you can maintain those values? And to what degree is balance? What comes to my mind is just creating balance somehow, and finding ways to, have that be a guiding light as you try to navigate through those challenges of, how much of this versus how much of that, and where can the community building come in? What the community building can look like, is just, from the point of view of through the internet, there are definitely just limits. There definitely just are. And I'm sure that within your community, you've explored a lot of them. Some of the things that I've thought about in schools where people live more geographically close to one another, which I think is probably not exactly the case for Stuyvesant, because I know people are coming from all over to get there. But still, on occasion, maybe it's on a Saturday, maybe it's at some other point. Now is, we're hitting a lot of snow these days, but I still think that it's worth thinking about fun ways to, to sort of create a group, if it's a classroom or something, and meet somewhere, stay distance, wear your mask, but, just have that sort of three-dimensional contact with one another for some period of time on something that, could possibly be we've done one of our schools, they actually did a scavenger hunt. It was really an interesting thing, and they set it up in the community, and everybody went out into the community to find certain things that they could, report back on. They did meet somewhere in the park. This was in the Bronx. They met somewhere in the park, and then everybody went back, to their home, and they just sort of had this few minutes together, but it took them, it was an activity that was going to be learning. It took them away from the computer, got them out into the community doing something for school, and then they did get a chance to see one another. So, it's just, I guess it's just continuing to try to pound on creativity around things. But again, I think values become really important at a time like this. And I think there'll always be time to get the tasks done at some point. But if you lose sight of those things that are holding us together from a values perspective, it's very hard to sort of go back and recoup those later.
Thank you.
Mark, do you have anybody waiting to ask anything or say anything? Is anybody with their hand up?
Yeah,
There are several, yeah.
So the question is, we also have been joined by our second guest speaker, Dawn Euster has joined us. Shall we pause questions here for a moment and go to Dawn, and then we'll take everybody's questions once she's had a chance to share her insights? I think probably would be the best way to handle this.
Courtney, this is Blanche. I wanted to ask Kevin a question or make a statement before Dawn.
Perfect, yeah.
Okay. Kevin, there's an awful lot of responsibility being put on teachers, and there's various social problems emerge in the schools. The teachers have more responsibility to respond. And notwithstanding the access that the board is giving to this University of Chicago program, my question is there more that DOE ought to be doing in support of teachers who are the front line in dealing with so many of these mental health issues? And I'm asking that from as a community board member, and part of what these meetings are all about is to say, not only identify problems, but to say, how can we as a board help in a possible solution? So I'm thinking, is there something that the board could do? Well, first of all, do you think that there is enough support coming from the DOE? Or if not, is this something that the board could do in the form of a resolution saying how crucial this role is given the problem, or what? Are there enough resources to address this program, this issue, or should there be more investment on the part of DOE? I guess is what the question boils down to.
Thank you for the question. I think this might also, I suspect, be a good question for Dawn as well. But I guess I think that, you make a strong point that there is a lot on teachers, and that was the case before the pandemic. And I think, now during the pandemic, you have certainly teachers who are also, being parents at the same time that they're trying to teach. And so that the burden is increased, but the mental health way that they sort of need to sort of try to hold and carry their students is a tremendous responsibility. I would say that there are resources available. I feel that I always think there could be more. I don't think there's enough appreciation for the impact on any person who's working with a community or children who maybe have or experience some kind of trauma, that the residual impact on the adults in that space is great. And vicarious traumatization is something that is often overlooked. And I think that in general, in teacher training, that there's not enough put in place as teachers are learning to be teachers to understand group dynamics and both what it therefore means when you're interacting with children or families who have gone through some difficult times. So I would always advocate and do advocate for there to be better support structures for teachers in schools where they would have a kind of support in the observation. Teachers get observed, but it's on teaching techniques. As a clinical social worker working in a school, we get what's called supervision, and that's where you actually review the work and the cases that you're working on, and you actually get support or asked about what's your experience of working with this children or that family, and how is it impacting you. And I think that's not a question that's asked enough of any other adult who works in schools with children. The University of Chicago program does address that. It does go into that. If they go to that, it's voluntary. It's not required. And so I would advocate for a structural, a structure implementation within a school where teachers, that kind of support goes to teachers. Teachers have a weekly professional development period, but I think it would be it could be better utilized towards supporting their own mental health and their own ability to support children's mental health.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to introduce Dawn Yester now, unless there are other questions for Kevin.
Well, there are a lot of other questions, but I would suggest that we definitely go to Dawn, and then we can circle back with questions, because she may raise other questions.
I'm sure she will.
Yeah.
Dawn, welcome. This is Blanche. And I always welcome anybody and everybody from Advocates for Children. Just a quick introduction of Dawn. Dawn is a lawyer, as many of the staff of Advocates for Children are. She's the director of the Children's School Justice Program at Advocates for Children. Dawn, welcome. And I certainly appreciate your quickness in responding to our invitation to be with us. If you could tell us just, first of all, a little bit about yourself, as much as you want to or don't want to, and a bit about Advocates for Children, and as I think a 45-year-old organization, and then get into what the purpose of it is and how you function. Welcome to Community Board 7, and the floor is yours, or the sofa, or whatever you're on.
Thank you so much, Blanche. I really appreciate the introduction and the invitation to be here tonight. As Blanche said, my name is Dawn Euster. I'm the director of the School Justice Project at Advocates for Children. And what that means is that I get to work on get to do some amazing work where I oversee a team of staff that focuses on providing advocacy, direct legal representation, doing policy advocacy, providing trainings and workshops in order to help students who have emotional mental health challenges, students who face school discipline, students who face court involvement, juvenile or criminal justice system, and those who are at risk of all these things. And what we do is do our best to try to help students get the services, supports, school placements that they need to succeed in school. And there certainly aren't enough of them for students who have, particularly those who have more severe mental health challenges. And so I also come to this work, and sharing about myself, I come to this work as someone who is really passionate about social justice, social change, and also someone, myself, I had begun to have clear signs of mental illness when I was a teenager. And I Julian, I went to Bronx Science, a little bit of a rival with Stuyvesant, or maybe, I don't know what that's like these days. I graduated many years ago. But I feel your pain and the pressure, and I'm sure, and it sounds like that pressure has not waned, which is really sad to me, even though we're in the middle of a pandemic here, that there's still, it sounds like incredible pressure to perform. And what about the what's going to happen if you know the learning isn't at the same par that it should be? Well, it can't be, right? I mean, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and you know, the Wall Street Journal just put out a piece, I think it was today, or I saw it today, where there were already 5 suicides, not in our student body at New York City students, 5 suicides already, which is just heartbreaking. And that, to me, that really strikes a chord with me, because I was in and out of psychiatric hospitals when I was a teenager, and so this work is really personal to me, as well as much as it is professional to me. And while I have no children of my own, many wonderful nieces and nephews, I do think of New York City's students as our children, our students, and I really think things would be very different if we, and those who have power in our city and administration would really put the investments and resources towards, I would hope, what we value most, and that's our kids, our students, our children, our youth. And there's so much I can talk about, and I really want to be as responsive to what you would like to hear about. I'd be happy to talk to you about, for example, I testified today on behalf of Advocates for Children. There was a hearing in front of the Education Committee on school safety bills, and I don't know if you're aware of that, but there are a few bills that are, one of them was really important and dear to us at Advocates for Children. A report that we put out a few years ago on students who are in emotional crisis. Data is collected and reported by the NYPD every quarter as a result of local law that we and other advocates, lots of other youth advocates in particular, were a big part of making this law, so that we have this really pretty rich reporting bill. And so the NYPD is required to report quarterly whenever they are called. And when I'm saying NYPD, I'm talking about not only police officers in the precinct who you think of traditionally, but also school safety agents who are still part of the NYPD. So they're required to report on whenever NYPD officers, any of these officers, are called in to intervene when a student is in emotional, what they're labeling the NYPD as an emotional crisis. And instead of a clinically trained mental health professional, NYPD is called in, and then somehow there's a decision made in part by often the NYPD that the student should be transported to a hospital for a mental health evaluation, even though, you know, police don't have training in mental health evaluations or who needs them. And so what invariably happens is we have thousands of students each year who are transported to the hospital, and then, you know, in a psychiatric setting, psychiatric emergency setting, probably further traumatizing them after they've been traumatized by being confronted by a police officer, and in some instances handcuffed. There are hundreds of students every year that are handcuffed by police while they're in emotional distress, while they're, you know, suffering, and, you know, further, in many instances causing suffering. And we know from our, you know, from our clients who we've had, who have experienced this, and the families and communities, that it's very traumatizing. And we also know from families and from clinicians that often, the vast majority of the time, young people, children, adolescents, when they are sent to the hospital, transported, it is medically unnecessary and they are just released afterwards. And there was no, they were told, no, this shouldn't have escalated to this point. This is something the school should have been able to handle with supports. And I think, and I'm sharing this because it is one area where there is definitely a lot of work to be done in terms of equipping our schools with, definitely more social workers so that they have more time to work with students when they have questions, be able to, they can't even accept, there's no way they could accept walk-ins, let alone be able to even reach the students on their schedules, let alone be able to respond appropriately when there is a crisis or prevent them from happening. So we certainly need more clinicians. We need more behavior specialists, people who really know how to not just really understand behavior and are able to then help come up with the students and the families and other school staff plans to be able to, prevent, issues from happening and be able to provide supports, like knowing what are the scenarios where students are struggling and what could we do, how could we do things differently? And for some students, and particularly students who have disabilities that are, and IEPs and sometimes, and 504 plans, some of them, and I hope I'm not speaking too much foreign language, but essentially there are certain laws that entitle students who have, different disabilities to be able to get certain services. And there are these plans that codify those services. And so, but oftentimes we see that students are just not getting what's on their plan, or things are not getting on their IEP that should be there. And then some students are just not getting, behavioral assessments and these supports and put in the right placements. And it happens, unfortunately, way too often. And because schools don't have, again, the resources, they often don't have the programs, they don't have enough social workers, and they don't have enough restorative justice and practitioners and coordinators and people who can, like, for example, if I'm thinking already that I want to reach out to someone I know in the Central Department of Education office to say, hey, can you send someone, some experts over, restorative justice people over to Stuyvesant? There's a big problem over there where there's a lot of pressure. I'm hearing that, that their, mental health is deteriorating. There's this I guess big friction between how do we find the space to, we have, it's only so much time to teach. And so we need to teach. We don't want the students to fall behind, but at the same time, students' mental health is deteriorating. Well, there's got to be what has to be the priority there, and doesn't mean that we stop teaching, but there has to be a way to incorporate, certain parts of the classroom time where, okay, maybe bringing in whether it's a restorative justice coordinator to do some community building within classes, right? To have certain structured time, maybe it's even 10 minutes, not even every day, 15 minutes, or maybe once a week. I think there are so many different ways that these things can come about. There can also be things that are where it's with, where students are comfortable with families as well, or can be invited, so that there is support structures going on from school to home. And I think there are really so many creative things that can be done but there has to be some of those resources, and there has to be coaching. It's not just training. One of my big things is it's about coaching too, because anyone can have, a day training even, or a 2-day training, but I don't know about you, but I couldn't do my job if I was just trained and then no one actually supported me afterwards and helped me, guide me along the way. So, I think, in terms of things that can be done, it would be, supporting this bill that I was testifying about today was about, pretty much almost ending the practice. I don't want to say ending because there is in really last, in egregious or very, very small circumstances, police can still handcuff students in emotional crisis. Essentially, it would be as if they had like a gun or a knife, like cutting somebody, it would be something really severe. Of course, you may have to do something a little bit more, if it got that out of control. But essentially, the bill significantly limits the ability of the police to handcuff students in emotional crisis, and it regulates their response and limits it so you have clinically trained mental health professionals who are intervening. So that's one thing. And then I think another big thing is money. The budget, the investments, and of course we're in a fiscal crisis. But there is limit on money. But for example, this earlier today, what came out at the hearing was that $20 million right now, or has somehow been lined up by this administration to hire 2 new classes of school safety agents in March and June. How is that possible? 475 more people when we have a hiring freeze across the city, and we're desperate to support our students and find any more money to be able to support them and the schools that they're in and the school staff who work in those buildings. So there was a lot of uproar, which was good earlier today about that. But I think like getting more community pressure around that, going to the administration saying no, not only can we not put that 20 million towards hiring more officers when we've already got over 5,000 of them, and we don't even have schools that are fully open. And even when we do, we believe, Advocates for Children and a lot of our allies believe that we should really be removing police from school and instead providing supportive services for students and staff that are able to really meet their needs and support them. And so I think there's a lot that can be done. And there's a lot more that I could say, but I really want to pause to see if people have questions and if I'm starting to go in the right direction.
No, it's fine. It's great. I was actually going to say, I know we have a lot of questions. So actually let's get to the questions, because I think there will be a lot to say on all of these topics. Seema, I know, was the next one with her hand raised before we went over to Don. So Seema, do you have a question for either Kevin or Don that you'd like to raise?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you both for your presentations. It sounds like the scale of the issue is huge. From Julian's anecdotal comment, 80% of kids, but I'm curious to understand what you guys are experiencing in terms of how many kids are we talking about? Is it everybody? Is it 80%? Is it 50? And then my follow-up question to that is, I know it's super difficult to plan in a pandemic. I can barely plan 2 weeks in advance, but as we think about, the coming year and, hopefully when we are back in person on a more regular basis, how do we think about sort of addressing some of these, what feel like open wounds now, and like almost re-socializing our kids and supporting them as they readjust back to the normal sort of routine of things? And how can we support you guys in terms of advocating for whatever resources or things you need to make that happen?
These questions, yeah, go ahead. I was just about to say, Kevin, these questions can be for either of you, so feel free to jump in.
Seema, could you clarify just when you were saying that the percentage of of children or percentage of children that you said that are, what was the modifier there?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what question I'm asking. Anecdotally, I know what my daughter's experience is. I read the papers, but I don't have a sense of, is it, do you feel like 80% of kids are sort of in difficult spots / almost in trouble? Or do you feel like, it's more of it's still like an outlier percentage, like 10%? I don't fully understand what the scale of the problem is, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think all we can do right now is do a little bit of guessing, but I think, anecdotally, I think it's large. I mean, I think it's significant. I don't think it's an outlier in any way. I think there are degrees, certainly, and I think the surrounding supports that were sort of in place can give you an indicator of where the greater difficulties are going to be or not be. The kind of supports that are needed, both economically and structurally, and from a community, safety perspective and health perspective and access to resources, and any of those things that we think about are where you're going to see, the greater response. But I don't think there's any corner of the city any child in the city that's going to have no response from a mental health perspective, or that there's going to be anyone who's not challenged to integrate this past year's experience into what they need to do going forward. And I think every school system has to sort of do take some time. There's I'm going to put another document in the chat. It's a link to a Google document, which I hope is put out there in a way that isn't restricted for people to see. But the document is called the Back to School Plan. I don't know if anybody saw that. It was, or had access to that. It was generated. I see, Julian, you had a chance to see that. It was generated last summer in anticipation of students returning to school this fall 2020. And I think it's going to be reviewed and tweaked and dealt with in order for us to think about returning to school 2021. And so there's a number of ways in which a lot of people came together to sort of think about that question, theme of how do we approach this return. But I think that one of the key elements of that was that every school was supposed to take the first, I believe it was 2 weeks, to really focus on the social emotional needs of their community, and really focus on that with specific lessons and curricula that are in that back to school plan. That was going to be handled, there are 1,100 principals in the system or something. That was going to be handled differently by each one. And the Child Mind Institute was made available as a backup resource for principals if they wanted to also do that. And certain schools have CBOs like ours or others that we help some of our schools implement that plan. But I think it's going to be a different level of intensity now, being a year and a half versus just a half a year when we get to that return to school. So I think that's going to have to be revisited significantly.
Thank you.
I can build on that. That was, what you were talking about in terms of Child Mind. They're actually doing Child Mind Institute, and I can put this in the chat. They're doing research right now. This just came out publicly. They're doing research to better understand the impact of COVID-19 on the developing brain, with a view toward delivering more effective mental health interventions and services to youth. So, and looking towards like now and the future. And so that might be something to look out for in terms of their research in terms of the numbers. I mean, what we know is that for sure, I mean, we know up until before the pandemic, we have that, the NYPD data that essentially shows that at least a few thousand students each year not only reach a crisis, but NYPD intervenes and they're taken to the hospital. And that doesn't, of course, include students where the NYPD does intervene and the students are not taken to the hospital, or where NYPD intervenes and they may treat the student, as frankly, in a criminal way and arrest them or issue them a summons. So that's not included in that data. And then also there are instances where, students are just, in crises and NYPD is not involved at all. And then there's also, well, students aren't in crisis, but they're still in emotional distress and they're still struggling. And that's all before the pandemic, that information. And now we know, of course, with the pandemic that, things are exacerbated and, that it does seem like things are, obviously, understandably much more stressful for students, and things are, there's a lot more trauma that students are dealing with. And I've been reading articles about like superintendents and like throughout the state, and a lot, and our chancellor, talking to that, them about really worrying about the increased suicide rate and depression and anxiety. And so, I think we all know that's happening. And yes, what to do about it? I think that, we come down back to again and again a couple of things. And one of them is that, first of all, in order for schools to be really, we want to make schools as safe and supportive and nurturing and inclusive as possible. And I think that certainly is got to be the starting point. And in order for that to happen, we really have to have law enforcement out of schools so that students will, because of there's just no way you can have these incidents where, police are the ones who are intervening when students are in emotional crisis, when students have to walk through, metal detectors just to get into school and they're waiting outside in the rain or missing classes and stuff like that. And so we do think that is a starting point. And it is particularly critical because those most marginalized students are the ones who are most impacted by the policing, and that's Black students in particular. The data is really, really harsh in terms of the disparities of students that are impacted by, for example, the NYPD interventions where, for example, before COVID, there were 2,250 incidents involving students in emotional crisis with the NYPD, handcuffing some of the students as young as 5 years old. Every year, students as young as 5, 6, 7 years old get handcuffed who are in quote unquote emotional crisis. Again, a determination made by, police. And of the students handcuffed, 58% were Black, although only 21% of New York City students are Black. And so and then of course, the disparities also exist by disability, where students are disproportionately, suspended and also impacted by these law enforcement interventions. And so we think that we do have to remove police from schools, and at the same time has to be coupled with, shifting funding and resources and investing in schools and students in a different way, in a way that where they are, getting the supports and services, which really, and, trauma-informed approaches, through staff that are trained and coached in providing direct services to students, and, social workers and behavior specialists, like I was saying, trauma-informed de-escalation staff,
Dawn, I just want to make sure I know, I see a lot of hands up. So I want to make sure I just want to make sure we get to all the questions. I think Bev, you were next. You were the next hand I saw. I think you're still muted.
There. As we're all aware, the middle schools in New York are imminently reopening. And some of them 5 days a week, some of them on a less frequent schedule for in-person instruction. And it seems, as you read the reports about this, that it's basically the flipping of a switch. Kids were there, now they're going to be here. And I guess what I'm very concerned about is what supports there will be for this new middle of the year environment that students are also not familiar with. They've not been in a school with all the protocols of distancing and cleaning and so on. And what the DOE may have put in place to help cushion that change for middle schoolers that you're aware of. I was working at the DOE right after and during 9/11, and so many of the issues that students experienced took a very long time to surface. And I suspect that may actually be true now as teachers begin to have person-to-person contact with students. There may be a lot that is not evident on the surface. So I would just appreciate either of you giving some insight into what you see as the issues, and if you're aware of the DOE providing any supports of that kind.
I think specifically unique supports at this time, I haven't heard of anything. I think you raise a good question. I do know, that the few middle schools that I work with directly had some time when they were open, and they have, the students who are coming back to in-person had been in person. And so there is, from the point of view of just strictly dealing with the protocols, there's some awareness there about what to do and how to do it. It's definitely a challenging, age group to maintain that with, but I think that the opportunity to be back in person is very, very welcome by those students right now, the students that were signed up for in person. For the most part, there's anticipation of going back in a positive way for at least the start of it. And I think that, I don't know of anything specific beyond that. I would anticipate that the schools, if I had an opportunity to offer something to schools, I would say that they should anticipate the kinds of things that they were anticipating when schools returned to school back in September as well. And many students spend a lot of time at home and then return to school. Some of the issues, again, depending on their situation, that may have been challenges for them and their families, will have shifted their ability to just sort of reintegrate comfortably back into a setting that's clearly going to be with many fewer students in any one space. And that does, for our staff who do work in schools where there are students, the experience of the limited number of students in schools has affected that shift of student to staff ratio in a way that seems to be able to sort of handle some of the challenges that were there when you had 30 kids in a classroom, whereas now you maybe have 8. And so there is a little bit more individualized attention that can be given in a sense that children aren't getting lost in the sauce when they came back in. Like after 9/11, it was just everybody back in school. So there is a difference here for the in-person student. I think the back of my mind, it's the student who's still remote, whose family chose to stay remote, and seeing, maybe their neighbor or somebody else go back and they're not. I think that's a child I think about, how making sure that they have the resources they need to feel supported.
So I'm not aware of anything in particular for middle school students, but I'm not sure if everyone is aware of what the DOE does have a webpage on mental health resources for students that I'm going to put in the chat. And I would encourage those who, those of you who, are essentially, it would be a great resource for families, for advocates to use, because it does list every single, it's supposed to list mental health resources specific to every school. There is an actual spreadsheet with that. And I would love for it to have contact information too, and or at each particular school, but essentially if it has in there what types of resources each school has. And so what I would suggest is contacting the principal or social worker, guidance counselor to ask who is the point person for this particular resource. And there are some new initiatives out there. Like, for example, there is one with, and this isn't particular for middle schools, although I'm sure there must be some middle schools that have this, is one of the newest initiatives is with health and hospitals. So there are certain schools that right now have these partnerships with health and hospitals. I think Woodhull Hospital is one of them, and I'm forgetting the other one. But essentially that where students need and are interested in it, and the families want them to have access to a clinician sooner rather than later, because oftentimes it can take months to see someone in the community, to see a therapist or social worker, counselor, and especially for low-income people, and that's the clientele that we have at Advocates for Children. And so this is really a fast track to get those kinds of services. So for example, on this website, if your school has that H&H, Health and Hospitals connection, that could be a resource for some students. There's also other schools that now have access to what are called, they used to be school mental health consultants. They're now being called, I think, school mental health clinicians, and they were not doing any direct service work with students. And we and other advocates were very concerned about that, because including school staff, were saying we really need for them to be doing some work with students too, and not just like capacity building. And so now there are a few hundred, I think there are close to 300-400 of them throughout the school system, where they are doing some trauma work, group work with students. And so that is a resource for some schools, for some students. So I guess I'll leave it at that.
Great. That's really helpful. And that's in the, I see that's in the chat now. Perfect. Thank you. Ira, I think you were next. No, I think you're muted. Hang on. You're still muted.
I think Shelley may be next. But if,
oh, that's so nice. We're very considerate tonight. Shelley, would you like to go next?
Thank you, Ira. Thank you. I just want to give you a drop of my background over 4 decades in the public schools on different levels. And I was I'm still on the middle school task force of the city council since 2005, because middle schools were most problematic. What I don't hear, what we didn't hear then and we don't hear now in support, is family support. The fact is that children belong to families, not to schools. And during the pandemic, parents needed support so they could support their children. To give you one example, a child who was doing well remotely, learning, getting good grades, one morning, the parents found him in the bathroom having drunk a half a gallon of Drano, okay, and in essence, committing suicide. And they had no idea, because he was doing well in school. He was able to concentrate on his Zoom classes. But what was going on with him emotionally? In isolation from all his friends from March and over the summer and not being able to be out in the park and not having the social contact. And this well-adjusted individual who always did okay, all of a sudden was in crisis. I can multiply that because I did coaching with voluntarily because the chancellor cut us off from any professional development as of March 14th, I think, to provide support to teachers and in the Zoom classroom. And again, we saw kids who were obviously struggling. And the question was, is someone going to be in contact with their parents and give them support? And certain teachers were able to be counseled to do that. We even had some support given to them by saying we would be on the call with them. But the system did not provide for parents, especially middle school and high school. They generally don't at all, but here it was so much more serious. What exists now, either in your agencies or that you know, that is or can support families, because the families being a broader topic, because many families are not two parents or one birth parent.
I can speak for, I guess, for counseling in schools, but not, system-wide. I mean, I think, the relationship of any one particular school to the adults in their community is, a topic of like with a lot of threads to it. And I think, Dawn, and hearing you talk about, the impact that policing has on children, it makes me think also about the impact it has on the relationship that schools have with families and the adults in the community. And there's a deleterious effect there for sure that needs to be addressed. I mean, for counseling in schools and any work that we would do or I would do as a social worker with a child in the Department of Education, I can't do unless I have the express permission and engagement of the family. So I wouldn't be permitted, and nor should I be, to work with that student unless I had first done outreach to a parent, explained what I was offering, why I was offering it, and get their input into what it is that we thought would be of help to their child, and to try to engage that in the context of the family's experience. Certainly during this pandemic, as an organization that does largely mental health programs, we have significantly pivoted to what I would call more case management type services. We've done food drives, set up food banks, clothing drives, reached out and had, dealt with lots of other organizations that have tried like heck to get internet services or computers or whatever into the hands of people that needed them, to varying degrees of success and frustration. But I think, I do think it's one of the, as an important point that you make, Sheldon, is this part of what another side of this pandemic for our organization in the schools that we work in is that it has raised the awareness of others around us, that you can't work in isolation of the family when you're educating the child. Sometimes that's because you see them through the screen. Sometimes that's because there's been an increase in empathy on both sides. There's been stories of parents appreciating what teachers go through more, and there's teachers experiencing what parents go through in their experience to better appreciate and understand the whole child because of this bizarre, lack of privacy that comes about through the remote experience, as well as a kind of empathy that comes through because, the teacher, may have had someone in their family die just as from COVID, just as that child had. And so there's, whereas those kinds of boundaries may have been there where teachers even on a class level may have had different exposures to danger than children on a different class. Some of those things have started to even out a little bit in this experience, and for a while brought people to make a different kind of connection. And I also think that the opportunity of normalizing, which I think will stay normalized, video conferences to an extent with families will open up opportunities for more engagement with parents. hopefully will take us away from the 5-10 minute parent teacher conference where you kind of do a quick tag team and, you know, you fog a mirror and so therefore your child's doing well. That you can have more regular and engaged conversations with a teacher and a family, as well as a social worker and a counselor and everything else.
All right. Ira.
Okay,
Thank you.
okay, I'm a little different question, a little different position than most of us, so bear with me a second. We're parents of 3 kids in New York City schools. We have one who is in 4th grade. He goes 5 out of 10 days. We've got a 6th grader who has spent 8 half days in her new middle school, but that's it. Okay, she's going to be flipping for that on-off switch that Bev was just talking about next week. And then we have a high schooler who finished his freshman year, but now he's had 8 half days this year. So they're all going to be experiencing different things. These half days are not meaningful. In fact, I think they're perhaps more stressful than anything else. Either we have a school or we don't have a school. But what I'm getting to is a stress that we haven't talked about yet, and it's in that greater category of social emotional stress. We talk about the stress of the pandemic. The pandemic is a once in a century event as we experience it. We're also concurrent with the pandemic. Our kids are having to live through a once in 60-year social change, transformation, upheaval, whatever you want to call it. It's there, it's around them. They have less understanding of that than the pandemic. And now we also, on top of this, is a perfect storm. We have a political upheaval in this country that we haven't seen in 160 years. And if you think that my 4th grader is not aware of the images that they see on TV of thugs storming our Capitol, you're wrong. They understand this. My 10th grader understands all of it. So it's not just the pandemic. It's this perfect storm of every problem coming home at the same time. And we live in New York, and we really we try to explain this to our kids, but our kids are also part of this. I hate to say this, my kid goes to one of those schools that 2 of our panelists go to, and he is very well aware of the demographic issues and the social issues of those schools right now. We're all aware of this, and our kids are aware of this too. And just because they're younger doesn't mean they don't understand when people march through, and it's been 3-4 years now, saying we will not be replaced, kind of stuff like that, or burning. This is stuff that's also falling on top of the pandemic, and it's real. And the kids understand this. They see it on YouTube. They see it. Some of their friends, peculiar enough, even though we live in New York, are on very different sides than most of us probably are to these issues. And these are very unusual stresses and unusual times, and it's a perfect storm. And I don't know quite how to address this. Putting something into historical perspective may work for you and me. It doesn't work that well for an 11-year-old who just changed, or 12-year-old who's just changed schools and has lost half of her friends because she's changed schools, and the other half because she doesn't have a school. So these are stresses that are above and beyond the pandemic. It's these 3 things coming together at one time that are a real threat. I mean, magnify what we call the pandemic. Any ideas, folks? I got the kids. I hope you have the ideas.
Well, you certainly, you got the range there. That's that's an incredible range of ages within the system to be juggling and supporting at this time. And, you know, I, you know, the only thing I would just come back to, you know, Ira, that just comes to my mind is just because, as you said, you know, the historical perspective might work for me at some extent. I can, you know, do this thing. I'm reading a book right now about Churchill and World War II, and I'm thinking about the parallels to what we're going through now and all this kind of stuff. And, you know, at least we're not going through the Blitzkrieg or whatever. And, but at the same time, you know, that's not going to work for your 4-year-old or any, like you said, or the 11-year-old.
Quite honestly, my wife makes fun of me. I compare the pandemic to the siege of Leningrad. We got a long way to go.
Yeah.
That doesn't work for my kids. It barely works for me.
Right. So I guess I would just coming back to the idea that, you know, making sure that you're asking them questions, that they have opportunities to communicate their experience, both with you and with other people. I really think communication is the most critical element when we don't have the socialization in the way that we need it, and the things that where people can get ideas. They need to be exposed if they have, you know, cousins, uncles, brothers, whatever. The conversations, they need to be asked questions, and they need to be allowed to sort of, to, like you said, what is it that makes it make sense to them, and make sure that it's something that, you know, aligns with generally a healthy perspective. And if not, what can you do to try to support them towards a more healthy perspective? But the conversation is everything, and it's not about talking to, but listening to, and how do you ask the right questions? And that's what any, you know, as a mental health person, that's always the skill I'm trying to create, or hone, is how do I ask a better question? Because it's not what's in me, it's what's in the other person, that they need to work it out. And if, you know, and sometimes that does mean going outside the home to other people to have those opportunities offered to them. I mean, you know, I do that with my own children. They both have outside people that they talk to professionally, to support them, and they're, you know, 21 and 25. But that's something we've done for years. It's really, I think, what we're talking about, what you're experiencing is what we're talking about, is how do you support children to go through this? And I think, you know, is the real deal.
I think we have to recognize it's not just the pandemic. There are a lot of other things
Absolutely
that are running around right now.
We just have other hands.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Blanche?
Do we have other hands?
We do, yes. Yes. We have Steve and then Catherine.
Thank you. And I want to thank both our speakers, Dawn and Kevin. And Dawn, thank you for your very personal stories as well. It really was inspiring. My question is specifically about sort of the closing and opening of schools. So it may be a little bit, I'm interested in both. I may focus a little towards Kevin because it's been a little bit of the topics that he's discussed a tad bit more, but I certainly be interested in both your thoughts. My specific background is just to say, like luckily, like many of the people on here were parents. I'm a parent of a 14-year-old. I specifically made a choice to put my son in blended learning. I thought that was important. I did a lot of study, and I did a lot of research, particularly looking at the AAP and their position, which was very much talking about the long-term mental health dangers, what we're here talking about here. I spoke to my own pediatrician. I spoke to 2 other doctors, and each one of them and again, I just recognize everyone has their own choices. I'm just speaking of mine. All of them encouraged me that they felt that the overwhelming, that they thought I should put my son in school as an opportunity, and all spoke about the topic that we're speaking today, which is mental health issues and the challenges that will happen. So, and then in general, we've had just a general statement is I think there's been a lot of coverage about health issues in schools, but I've been disappointed about the lack of coverage about the topic today. I think there was a lot of data, there was a lot of associations, there was a lot of early studies coming out that mental health was going to be a problem about now, and I personally did not feel it was covered enough. So my long-winded question, as I would say, is could you reiterate and really, number one, just reiterate what are, if you don't have your kids in school, if they're isolated, can we dig in and reiterate what are those long-term effects? Specifically, what are you seeing? I know that my son was in blended learning and he is now not, and he's a pretty advanced kid, and I see a difference that he is now not in school. And I would be a little bit, try and get you, be a little specific and say, are you in favor of reopening of schools? I'd be specific. I'd like to get your specific take as an expert, what your take is on that. And I'll stop there.
Thanks, Stephen. Am I in favor of opening? Do I get the option to have that control? If you give me that,
No,
then
but
can.
I decided to hold your feet a little bit. I know because you're an expert, and I want to hear experts, and I understand.
Right.
You answer as you want, but you know,
Yeah.
bring in experts, and I want to know experts, and so whatever you're comfortable answering, say so. But my mom always said, if you don't ask a specific question, you don't get a specific answer. So she sits in the back of my head.
You know, I would say that I would say with the right resources in place, I'm in favor of reopening schools. My biggest concern about our school system in the city is the physical plant of the schools, is the you know, so that would be a factor for me if my child was in high school right now and making that decision. I'd want to know like the building that they're in and sort of the way that the building is constructed as part of it. I mean, because the you know, you had to juggle between the health safety and the mental health safety, right? The physical health and the mental health. And it's, you know, I think at this point, I definitely think that the way the protocols are created, I think that the understanding that we've all had in this, I do think we can open schools with more limited numbers of students. I think there's ways of working that out. I don't think we can have, I would not be in favor of just fully reopening schools to every child to be back in the school. I don't think that's wise because of, you know, in a city like ours, the intergenerationality of this, until we get more vaccinations in people, I would definitely be concerned about that. Not necessarily for the health. I don't think we're seeing as much in teenagers of COVID and a negative impact, but it's not zero. It's something. And I think that, you know, children travel throughout the city and live in multiple generations. And so I'd be concerned about that. I think the process that you went through to make a determination is the process that, you know, every family should go through on some level. When you were describing that, I was wondering, you know, with all of those inputs, I assumed that there was some input that your son had, and wonder what that was, if he was in favor. I assume he was, but.
Yeah, well, he's quite a talkative young lad, although he's being quiet in the other room today, so I'm happy about that. But no, he wanted to go back to school. Of course, he looks towards his parents and adults to sort of guide him in that. But I certainly asked him that you would have either choice, and given it being a safe scenario, would you want to go back in a blended perspective? And he was emphatically wanted to do so, and emphatically wants to get back to school, and has asked me numerous times, when am I going back to school? And he only went to school 2 hours a day. So meaning 2 hours a week, meaning it really wasn't blended. It was, I won't get into all the challenges, but it worked out that he only would go to school for 2 hours on one day. And he told me that was his favorite 2 hours a week, literally. And every week says, when am I going back to school?
Yeah, and that's what we saw in the high schools that we support, that the students who were there were thrilled to be there. And from the high school perspective, compliance was not an issue in the schools that we supported. Students would do anything to make sure they could still stay there. So I think that was important. I just would say, I guess the other thing, you know, about this in terms of whether schools should open, or particularly around high schools, one of the things I've been advocating for in the spaces I occupy with DOE administrators when I talk to them or they talk to me, and I would be curious, Julian, what you think about this. I have not I have felt that there has been a sort of a deafening silence from the central administration towards supporting high school students, to sort of be anticipating whether you're coming back or not, for just messaging the sense of, awareness of what it is that you're going through, of the challenges that might be there for thinking about whether there would be a prom or whether there would be an end of year trip or what graduation would be like or spring break or any of the things that are part of normal high school rituals. And I just haven't sensed that communication going out to say that we're conscious of this, we're doing everything we can, and we hope to, as soon as we can, get you back to your life that you want, that we know you're anticipating. And that's something that if there's any way as a community board or other places to advocate for, that's something that I think is really missing. I don't know.
Deafening silence would
I'm
be an
missing something.
understatement as a parent from my perspective. So I think there's been zero to no communication regarding this. And I'm a parent. I'll defer to Julian as a student, who probably feels it much more. But I think that the current administration has done, again, this is my personal opinion, almost zero in terms of trying to listen to sort of talk to the kids about, letting them understand, we hear you, we're doing our best. Julian, we're gonna try and get you a prom. How about sports? Zero on sports. I was in the borough board this morning. They talked about challenges around sports. Zero. There hasn't been a single message coming out of the central office about sports. So, I could not agree enough that there has not been enough of that. And I think there's been a lot of challenges along the way. And hopefully, I think I can speak as a parent. And again, Julian as a student can speak himself. But I'm just hoping we can just get through the year and get to next year and really start focusing and having a good year, because I think we can write a book on a lot of the challenges and the lack of conversations as a parent that I've received personally.
Does Julian have a response to Kevin? If
I
not,
think a smile, maybe a yes, but I'll let him speak.
Julian?
I can respond, but I think Catherine and potentially Mark as well have had their hands up for a while. So if they'd want to speak first, I definitely support that.
Julian, please go. Thank you for always being so considerate and aware, but please respond. I'm interested in hearing your response.
Thank you, Catherine. Yeah, I really appreciate what you've all said about Youth Voice, because I think it's the missing factor here. And I'm fortunate enough to serve on a bunch of student voice groups within the DOE. I'm part of, there's a group of students from across the city called the Chancellor Student Advisory Council that meet very frequently and occasionally, although definitely not enough, are able to meet with the Chancellor and discuss these issues. And I'm also part of, the DOE has a very small policy roundtable group, which is, I think, their attempt at community community liaison supports, working with parents and community leaders to sort of run policy decisions by them before they get released. But they meet at 10 a.m. on Thursdays. And so I can never attend the meetings because I'm in school and there's a bunch of other students on it, but it's very paradoxical there. And so there's a lot of talk in the DOE about how they listen to and center student voice. And I mean, as Ms. Euster's probably, I think she's mentioned, student advocacy organizations are really leading this work, like groups like Teens Take Charge and all that. And DOE is very, very, very adamant about acknowledging those groups and praising their work and talking about collaborating with them. But in practice, it doesn't really result in that. And I think there's a total lack of youth voice. But I think for me, the greatest place where I don't see it is at the school level. And in this way, I think the school I go to is completely not representative of other schools, both in terms of the entire remote learning experience and also in terms of student voice. When I speak to students at other schools, they talk about, going to class, having, not even the entire class show up. Everyone's cameras are off. The teacher is struggling to get students' attention. And those are the classes that they have live Zoom for. Some of the classes they don't even have live Zoom classes for. They're getting asynchronous learning that they're having to complete. They're behind on the curriculum. They're not getting any engagement whatsoever. And a lot of them are in situations where it's hard for them to, they're sharing a room, they're sharing devices, they don't have a strong Wi-Fi signal. There's so many issues that students are facing. And the key throughout all this is I don't think their voices are being heard by their schools or just in their classes, and both in a literal sense, like their voices are not being heard in their classes by their teachers, and also in a, you know, their thoughts and opinions aren't being taken into consideration by the DOE and by schools in general. And this is sort of where like I find the issue really concerning, because I think there's amazing support services. I mean, both of you, you know, work for them, but you know, but like the counseling department at my school does amazing work, but it feels like it's it doesn't loop back into the circle. You know, students can speak with counselors, or I think we have a school social worker who we're very lucky to have, who students can also speak to. But it feels like there's only a few students who are able to take advantage of that, and it's not systemic. You know, it's very individual, small level. And so I think there's definitely a student voice aspect missing from all of this. And the DOE, I think, recently sent out a survey. Well, they did their annual school survey for all families to fill out, which I hope everyone here filled out who has children in school, because I think they use that to inform a lot of what they do. And they had questions on there about these issues, but I think it's not being addressed properly. And I think it's something that I think this committee could, if we're going to write a resolution, is something that we should really emphasize when we're talking about it. I'll also reference just briefly, we had I know Ms. Easter referenced restorative justice. You know, we had youth restorative justice leaders come present to this committee last summer, actually, not even that long ago, talking about the work that they're doing, which I think would be really great to bring into schools. And having youth lead those is also so important. But yeah, that's
Catherine?
Thank you. So I first want to thank Julian for the comments about student voice, because that's so important. So thanks for always bringing that into the conversation. And thanks to Courtney and Blanche for hosting this meeting on this really important topic and bringing it to our attention, and responding so quickly to the reports of suicide among youth in the news. And thanks to Kevin and Don for being here. I have a couple questions. The first is that with Shelley Fine, who's on the call, or has been on the call, I co-chair Health and Human Services, and our committee has been working with Safe Horizon and other organizations on concerns about increases in child abuse and domestic violence during the pandemic, with children and families isolated, and school professionals not having access to kids, and not kind of being able to directly witness what they're going through, and having the ability to report. So is Advocates for Children, Dawn, I'm going to direct this question to you. And I've been familiar with your organization for 15 years, since I actually taught in public schools in the Bronx. And it meant so much to me as a teacher to know that your organization and your advocacy, to know that your organization exists and of your work. And so is Advocates for Children kind of working on this issue? Are you concerned about child abuse and increase in child abuse being a cause of kind of the current mental health crisis and increase in suicide? And is Advocates for Children doing anything to address this? Because I know that it's Safe Horizon and the DA's office, and I know the city is like really struggling with how to reach kids and that are in these situations.
So we can't say that we're working directly on the issues the way you're talking about them, because our main focus, the ties that bind us throughout our organization is, of course, education. And we do certainly have concerns about what you're talking about. And we have what we've actually been seeing from our work, from our own experience, is the opposite in play. What we've seen during the pandemic is actually an increase in reports by school staff to child abuse, the reporting registry for education neglect or in instances where students, for example, like didn't have access to technology or Wi-Fi, or you know, things that where you know, the family needed help, like we were talking about earlier, where what are we going to do? You know, families need help. They need, some of them need, you know, housing, need food, need resources. And so so what we've actually seen, and not just us as an organization, our partners and allies and other advocacy organizations, is a similar thing. And so the state and the city have actually been working on modifying regulations to let educators know and school staff know, here's what you know, here are the steps to take, and here are resources that you can access to help families be able to, you know, have their children access education. So we honestly have not been involved in what you're talking about. I mean, we certainly have clients who have you know, are in shelters, and you know, and domestic violence shelters, and also and families that, you know, have that history, those histories. And we you know, at times will, you know, link families to other organizations for supports directly related to you know, getting that kind of you know, the support for, to be able to deal with what's going on in their household. But that's really not an issue that, you know, is, I would say, I mean, we're dealing with so many other things, but also it's just, I guess the nexus to education is not as direct as some of our other issues. And we're, you know, I think, you know, in individual cases where we're already working with a family, absolutely, you know, we'll then deal with those issues. But in terms of on a systemic basis, no, we're really not.
Thank you so much for that answer. And Kevin, did you have in your role, have you kind of witnessed or addressed that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I echo what Dawn said in terms of the experience. I mean, the use of the central registry to, you know, to sort of at times right now, our concern has been it's been used as a punishment for students who've had challenges to get engaged, which has seemed inappropriate. And so there's been advocacy and concern about that. And yes, to the, you know, domestic violence challenges as being not an increase, but sort of a continuation of what types of experiences that were there before. We did have, you know, a concern about that, and it was certainly something, particularly with in the very beginning during the lockdown, there was a little bit more of a sort of a sharp focus on what would happen in that regard. And I think, you know, it could be, to your point, Catherine, that maybe things were, you know, like people aren't getting to children who need to be gotten to for support. But it didn't seem to be playing out that way in the long run right now. But, you know, I was thinking about, to Steve's question before, when he was asking me what are the long-term effects or what are the impact of this. And I think while we're still in the midst of it, it's hard to know. And you know, I think some of these things have a delayed response a little bit. And I, you know, will certainly keep an eye on, we have thought about what your question, Catherine, but aren't seeing it in that way right now, just as I think Dawn had described.
Great.
Courtney, any hands up?
Yeah, I think Mark, had his hand up earlier. I wanted to see whether he still had a question that he wanted.
I think it would surprise absolutely no one to learn that all the concerns that I was going to raise have been eloquently already addressed in the responses by our two panelists. So I thank you both very much, and you've given me an awful lot to think about. And I will resist the usual practice of my thinking aloud which serves no one. So I thank you for the opportunity to ask, but amazingly, what an amazing presentation tonight. So I thank you.
Courtney, if I could just say, I think as a committee, we need to talk a little bit about what our next step should be as a result of tonight's meeting. As we all know, we're an advocacy organization, community boards are. What, if anything, have we heard tonight that would point us in the direction of exercising our advocacy role? I've heard a number of things. I've heard things that would suggest certain budgetary responses we might want to advocate for.
Blanche,
yeah.
I agree with you. Do we want to talk about this first, or do we want to take any questions from the attendees before we talk about next steps?
We have more. That's what I said. Do we have any hands or?
Yeah, I don't see any in the attendees. But if anyone has a question, I'm looking to see if any hands up. I don't see any. Or if, as we move on, if you have a question, you can feel free to put it in the comments too. Okay, Blanche, back to you.
Okay, back to committee. And Steve, you're still with us, I think.
Yes, I am.
Okay. As our peerless leader.
I mean, if I would add to kind of what you were saying, and generally how we've done this is, so we may want to consider if we want to do a resolution, and then if so, what would that resolution look like? I'll allow you and sort of Courtney to kind of work through that as the new co-chairs. But for instance, I think this has been a pretty strong topic and something I think we can make some type of statement on. I think there has been an incredible amount of news that we've reached a tipping point. And whether it was a resolution just acknowledging what the status of this, and again, we could talk through what they were being asked for, but I certainly think it's an important topic and enough information, and we're at an inflection point where making sure that as a community board, we acknowledge this challenge. But again, the process that we've had is ask other people, do we think this is something we want to make a resolution on and what it would look like? Mark's always very good at filling in the blanks after that, as my past process. But again, I'll let yourself and Courtney ask the group. We were always very collaborative, and I encourage us to be as well. I certainly would be in favor if the group felt that there was something to make a statement here. I think it's a very important topic. I haven't seen a ton of resolutions coming out of other CB boards, I should say, in Manhattan. So we certainly would be making a statement.
Okay. First thing I think Courtney and I might want to do is to thank our two guests. And I'm feeling a little bit guilty. I'm sure at some point we told them, you could speak for 15 minutes and maybe 30. Obviously, they have exceeded that, thank goodness. And we certainly want to thank them. And they're welcome to stay with us as we deliberate a bit about how we want to proceed. But if you want to leave the setting, we will miss you, but we will certainly understand. But let me ask you before you may or may not go, as you know, community boards are here to advocate for issues such as yours. Is there anything you would like us as a committee to particularly consider, whether we go a letter to whomever or a resolution? Would you like us to consider any particular aspect of your work and operation. Kevin, since you were here first, I'll ask you first.
Yeah, I mean, I think just broadly, speaking, and I think, Dawn, you alluded to this too, but I think as schools come back to reopen, I just think that, or as we go through this now, but even going forward, if the advocacy is for things to come, I think it's to continue to say that these supports for mental health and social emotional development of children need to be increased, and that the anticipation of what's to come is going to be greater than what we know now. And that the types of resources that, Dawn, I just heard you say that there was, $20 million that was going to go to additional SSAs like that. I didn't know that. I knew about this hearing today. I wasn't able to attend it, but I'm sure I'll be getting lots of emails about this later, and I'll be tweeting my fingers off around that. But if there are resources that are to be applied, it really needs to go to this area. And it's, as you mentioned, I think it was Blanche, it's for teachers as well. I mean, it's everybody in that system and families, as you mentioned, Sheldon. I mean, as a community, we need this. And I think schools are appropriate places to be hubs, to be central points where these things can come together. We're not the parents, we're not, but it's everybody, and it's a communal gathering place. And I think that's where the supports need to happen and the resources need to be made available in abundance. Like go crazy and go too far on that. And then we have to argue to pull it back, as opposed to maybe we just got enough. Let's go nuts.
Dawn, what's your wish list?
First of all, thank you so much again for inviting me. It's really been a pleasure being here with all of you, and you're clearly also dedicated, and it's just really wonderful to spend the evening with you. Unfortunately, I will have to step away after this.
I figured you had to.
I actually haven't eaten dinner yet, but that's okay. I will get there. But what I would love to do is I can send you, Blanche, I can send you what Advocates for Children, our budget request is to, this year for the city. And so you can see, it in writing.
Thank you.
But essentially, it is really, a lot of it is for direct supports for students, roles, more of social workers and restorative justice coordinators, and other types of, staff that really do the direct supports for students, and are there for them and help build not just them individually, but like Julian was saying, when there's enough of them too, and when there are enough of them to actually not just do their job, but also train others and coach others in the school to be able to be supportive as well and build relationships and heal and that, and to turn it into a really more of a school-wide change, right? And so, and so in order to do that, you do need money, and so I'd be happy to send you our budget request, and also as an organization, we put out a vision for New York City for the mayoral candidates. And that includes, there is one page on mental health supports and police-free schools. There are also various other recommendations. I'd be happy to share that with you as well. And I think in terms of things that you could do, yes, you can testify at the budget hearings, right, coming up. I think that would certainly be very meaningful. There's the preliminary budget hearing, and then of course the executive budget hearing. And so I think as many people as possible, and as and potentially submitting written testimony, of course, and also potentially I think a resolution sounds terrific too. And letters could be letters to the mayor, to the chancellor, as well as I think also, you know, keeping these issues alive. And I think one thing that happened today at the city council hearing, I'll leave this with you, is that when this bombshell dropped about all this money going to new classes of school safety agents, which, you know, nobody knew about, almost nobody knew about, that really, that coupled with some really dedicated people working in the Department of Education who, you know, have really, you know, we partnered with them. They're amazing. And the particular person who from the Department of Education who was brave enough to talk about, you know, these new hires that nobody knew about, also was talking about how we can't just move school safety agents from the NYPD to the Department of Education. We really have to reimagine. And this is what a lot of the youth advocates are talking about, and we're talking about as advocates, reimagine the role of school safety, not just so that we have more people who are supportive, but also to change the whole system and the structure within the Department of Education so that there's a different support structure, and also within schools and within districts. And so I think that there's room for advocacy around moving the needle long-term by advocating for, you know, the budget, and also I think what will be happening also as a result of you know, the hearing today is that I think there will be more community outreach, because that was also exposed as one big, and even the head of the City Council Education Committee, Traeger, Councilmember Traeger, said too that, you know, the City Council has also been at fault for not engaging the community enough. And also the Department of Education has said too that they really want to do more in terms of genuine engagement with community, with families, with students, and with, you know, educators as well as advocates. So I think that and I'm hoping there will be opportunities for more of that. And when that happens, I think, you know, as those of you who are parents too can also, you know, advocate on, you know, in those forms, whether individually and also, you know, as part of this board.
Okay, thank you so much, and have a good supper. Now, Dawn, I know you have my email, so whatever it is you want to send.
Great, we'll definitely be in touch, Blanche. And if
you so very, very much.
If anyone wants to connect, or if you have any, you know, if there are any education issues that come up, we do have a helpline also that, you know, it provides technical support for the entire city.
Okay, and Kevin, thank you. And you're both free to stay, hungry or not, and you're free to go. I won't bet on what choice you'll make. Thank you very much.
So Blanche, while this is Steve speaking, I did pull up something, and I did pull up something from this morning. Today's borough board meeting specifically talked about preliminary budgets, and my thinking, it sparked a thought process specifically just about more of the mental health challenge that we're talking about. My understanding is that the preliminary state budget has in it $35 million in FY22 for student social and emotional support. So you certainly could take a position that you're advocating for that, and for that to be in the final budget. And it also, as we all recall, that there has been a push for more social workers in New York City schools. I don't know if there's been recent comments on that, but we could certainly take a position that we're advocating for the state budget in terms of social workers and the continued support work for social workers because of the things that we heard from Kevin and Dawn and the things that we said.
It's a long-standing issue, yeah.
So that could be an angle. I know there's to me, it seems that there's kind of two issues. I'm not saying that the school safety issue is nascent and real. I just kind of think there may be two different topics. I'm not sure how to make that together. And I'll leave it to that. But I do think we could talk about what we heard today and then the importance of these budgets for our kids moving forward could be one angle on a resolution.
Okay. Courtney, any comment on a further communication from us and to whom?
Yeah, only that I was also struck by the comments about the need for ongoing training and coaching. And so when we are if we're talking to
Training and
point,
coaching for who?
for the teachers, actually,
right, exactly.
which Kevin had noted. And I think
Right.
that's a really interesting, important nuance. If to Steve's point, we're talking about about advocating for the importance of this, I think that's a nuance at least I had not thought of, and that I think is important. And then I think also Julian's point about ensuring, as always, and this is not the first time we've talked about this, the importance of keeping the student's voice front and center, I think is also an important nuance that was raised tonight that I think that should be included in anything that we do.
Courtney, I'm going to suggest that I think, number one, is there any committee member who feels that some forward motion on the part of the committee is not necessary? I don't know how we'll get your response, but I doubt that very much, that anybody objects to it.
Hi,
Mark?
this is
Oh, sorry. Okay, we haven't heard from you.
this is Irena. I'm not against a resolution or a letter. I mean, I think the topics, the issues that were raised here are really, really important and dire. And I feel like this conversation is not balanced. I wish that I could hear from the city, like, maybe inviting a representative from the office of the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, or a representative from the Education Department that is involved in these issues. I think any approach we take might be better informed to get that perspective. I mean, I don't know if you've had it before. I haven't, I'm a recent member of this committee, and I don't know if you've had representatives from those city agencies come and talk about some of these issues that were raised tonight, or whether you think that that's, a waste of time. But I just think that there would be some value in getting a better understanding of the issues raised tonight from the agencies responsible for them.
Irena, I could speak a little bit. We have requested people from the DOE on multiple agencies on multiple times every single month that I was the chair. They have never responded or accepted our invitation. So I could assure you that they are not being asked to come and present at our meetings. And I think other people have asked as well. Mark can speak as well. I know Mark has reached out, but we have asked the DOE many times to come to our meetings, and they have not responded or said no.
And have we tried to get either our council member or the borough president to make the request on our behalf? And
request for what?
It's not like they're not committee. They're community. Each of these agencies have community outreach people, right? Yep. So
we ask them.
It's not as though they don't have people on staff. And I think given the pandemic, maybe they might be more receptive.
We have asked those people. I'll let Mark speak. I know he's reached out as well. When I was co-chair, he had reached out numerous times for us to try and get DOE members, and he may add as well. But I can assure you that we have reached out we were dying to hear from DOE representatives prior to, in the last 12 months.
I guess if they're not coming to a meeting and they're not willing to at least have a conversation with us. How effective are resolutions to them?
Irene, let me just give you a sense of what I would think a resolution might look like, okay? And is there any question either in your mind or any other committee member's mind that we don't need more training and support for teachers? It'll be a general sort of statement, okay? Or the question of police in schools versus trained social worker support. I'm just trying to think of some of the things that might be in an agenda, in a resolution, or some communication. I'm not wedded to resolutions.
And then Blanche, I think Catherine also has her hand up. I want to make sure. I don't know
Okay,
if
Catherine?
Thank you so much, Courtney and Blanche and Irina. I think those are all really important comments. I have a couple suggestions for the resolution, which I think is a fantastic.
Oh, for some communication. Okay.
I have a couple suggestions for the resolution, which I think is a really fantastic idea. And it's not just an issue. Part of the benefit of the resolution is advocacy, and part of the benefit is just to bring it to people's attention. And I have a lot of confidence in Courtney and Blanche in doing this the right way. And so they could even reach out to a few of the local schools, the principals that have come to our meeting and say, hey, you know, over email and say, hey, this is what we're thinking for a resolution. What do you think? Do you have any feedback? That's one idea. We also have, I think the most important voice in this space is our students, and Julian's here, and we've heard from Julian about what's needed. Students are very sophisticated in describing what they need, what schools should do, and how to do it the right way. And Julian has highlighted a couple important things for us. One is for students to be involved in any kind of process of coming up with remedies to address mental health issues, of opportunities for students to communicate with each other and with teachers about mental health challenges. And students will talk about it if they have the opportunity. They'll talk about what schools should do. They'll talk about the feelings that they have. And I think the opportunity for kids to be heard is a huge step in kind of addressing the problem, is just giving students space to talk and be a part of the process. So one thing we could do is call on the DOE to develop a process for students to have some voice in how kind of issues, mental health issues that arise from remote learning and how these issues are addressed. I don't think it's enough to call on funding. I don't know what difference that's going to make, but we could, and I think Julian should be a part of writing this resolution. We could creatively think of a strategy using our expert, who's Julian, to involve students in the process of deciding what to do with resources, deciding what kind of trauma-informed or trauma-sensitive training is needed for teachers. And there's so much variety in what's available for teachers, so I do think we have to be careful there. I think Irina is right, that we have to be careful about saying what schools need, but we do know Julian is here, and I think he's the most important person. And I think we could call on the DOE to provide, and the city to provide more resources, but most especially to center students in that process, whether it's to have like a student committee or student committees in schools or students on the school leadership team to develop some kind of plan. There's so many opportunities, but I think involving students, trauma sensitive or trauma informed training and supports for teachers, those are two really great strategies highlighted by Julian and reiterated by Courtney that I think should be center of a resolution. I think it would be great if Julian would be willing to help.
Thank you, Catherine. Mark, if you are unwilling Mark, would you take the lead in getting a resolution started?
Well, I'm happy to help, but I'm not sure that we're how far along we are with that at this point. Because it sounds like there may be some we only have very general statements of concern and ideas right now. So we could form a very general statement, but it might be what I'm hearing from our colleagues is that there might be a desire to do something a little more specific, and maybe a little bit more informed by a slightly wider outreach. So I'm happy to do what the chairs want me to do, but I thought it'd be appropriate to offer that thought.
Listen, I'm happy to write wherever we net out, and I'm happy to work with Julian on it. I do think we should talk about the importance of not writing a resolution that, I mean, to your point, that is just talking to ourselves. So
that's what concerns me, Courtney.
Yeah,
that's exactly what concerns me. And so I didn't realize that there had been these overtures that were ignored. But I worry that if we write a letter, and I'm in support of everything I've heard tonight, and but I just want it to be effective. I want it to reach the right people, for those people not to feel like we're attacking them, but rather we want to work with them. And what are you doing? And sort of, would you be willing to do this as well? I love the idea of a council for young people. And I think maybe the agency would be open to that. I'm just trying to figure out a way to bridge whatever this gap is between, I mean, we're supposed to be part of government, right? Albeit, quasi. And it feels like there's this disconnect, like we're here to help government because we're the closest to community residents than anyone else. And somehow we don't have a relationship with government to say, this is what we've gleaned through personal experience that Julian has had, through conversations with children and youth advocates. Like, we've gleaned all this information. We want to share it with you in a meaningful way so that we can kind of move the dial. And you have our support to make that happen, whether it's with the city council or at the state level. And so I was just trying to figure out how we could get a conversation going so that when we send in the letter or the resolution, it actually has some impact.
So I see, Ira, I see you. And let me just say one thing, which is I think Steve mentioned earlier that there was a comment in the budget that I think is a call out specifically for this type of topic. And so I think, to your point, we are talking about something that has already been designated and called out. And so I'm not sure it would be seen as a tisk-tisk. It might just be seen as this is something that's already being talked about. We're on board. We did a meeting on this, and here's some ideas and thoughts and in support of something you've already flagged as a priority. And then Ira, I know your hand has been up. I think you're unmuted.
Yeah, now I'm good. The reality of it is that there are a lot of people in New York, there are a lot of people in a lot of large cities that for various reasons we don't have enough time in the day or the week or the month, do not want to see the schools reopen. I won't go into what the reasons are. I'm not going to imagine. We wrote a previous resolution looking to open the schools. The reality of it is the central board and the mayor want to reopen the schools. So any piece of evidence that they can get that further reinforces that is certainly something that they will listen to. And we've done that already in one resolution. We can take that resolution, build on that, and say, and here are some of the things that would make reopening even better. do this, do that, do the other thing. We're all in favor of you reopening with or without this, but this will make your reopening even better and even stronger. And then it becomes a cheerleader letter that various people can wave around. And that's all it is. That's all most of what we do is. It's a letter that somebody can grab on and say, this is what we want. I think we have a number of other state or city employees or former employees here, but everybody's looking for, when you're inside this creature that's called government, you're looking for somebody outside your immediate agency to support what you're doing, and you can prove. Bev, am I right?
No, Ira, listen.
Well, all we're trying to do is be cheerleaders.
Listen, I worked in government for almost 20 years. Okay, so I know how government works.
Yeah.
And really what I'm saying is actually to your point, which is that they need a cheerleader. They need community people to advocate for their policies. And all I'm saying is, let's just make sure that whatever we put in this letter gets to the people. I don't want it to be like in a round file, right? In the round file. I want it to go to someone who's going to take that and say, hey, Community Board 7 is supporting us. They want us to open schools, but they want us to do it in a way that also thinks about the mental health of the young people coming back into the classroom. Well, and all I'm saying is, let's just make sure whatever, if it's a letter or if it's a resolution, that it makes its way to the right person so that so that someone knows that we actually sent something in, and it's just not, it just doesn't find itself in a file.
I rely on the skill of our leadership, and past and present, and in the office and on the board to affect that as best we can. We just have to agree with them on giving them something to send. That's all.
Okay.
Just going to say one last thing, and I'm going to hand it back to Courtney, and that is, the purpose of the stuff that we do isn't necessarily it's to a broader audience array of the DOE. For instance, this morning, our borough president said, give me resolutions on this, give me resolutions on this. So sometimes things we're doing are going towards people who want something to advocate. Specifically, Gail Brewer asked for multiple resolutions, and that's why she shared this. So again, I would love to have DOE in the room. I would love to have DOE in the room. But
that's the first time I'm hearing this. You never said that the borough president specifically asked the community board to pass a resolution in support of mental health for young people returning to school during a pandemic. I would have never brought it up if you had said that. That's exactly what I was hoping. Well, that's the connection I was looking for.
That's why we have meetings, and here we are, and there was a broad range of things presented, and specifically around education and clawbacks. You're saying, come back with a resolution so I can advocate for these. So, I don't want to sit there and say that we had a 20-minute conversation with Gail about mental health, but she did say, send me your resolutions and empower me to be an advocate. So I did want to say there's other things we can do. With that, I'm going to hand it back to Courtney and Blanche, and I think it's timing wise. Hopefully, we can sort of
Courtney, let me just say, I understand what you're saying. I don't believe in resolutions or any communication just for resolution's sake. They wind up in the basket. You know it, and I know it. Courtney, you expressed, could you get a draft? Have you been able to process, I'm sure you've been able to, could you process some of what has been said tonight? Well, apart from our speakers, but certainly from our board members in the last 12 minutes, and get a kind of a draft draft document. And
let me just summarize what I think I'm hearing, and then let's vote on whether we agree that we're going to do something along those lines, and I'm happy to put a draft together. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Okay. So what I think we're saying is that we've previously done a resolution where we called for the reopening of schools. I think I was saying we build on that resolution by saying we've spoken to people about the mental health impacts of what the ongoing closure and ongoing isolation is doing to the mental health of our students. And then knowing that there is a budget that is being designated specifically to address mental health issues, I think we can bullet out some of the suggestions and priorities that we heard, including involvement of more students, the development of the council, the ongoing training and coaching. We can reiterate our call for social workers. All of those things, I think, can be included under the umbrella of, as we move forward with reopening, these will be things that will remain important and relevant and to help support where our leaders are already going with this, given where they've prioritized some of the funding. Does that sound on track with what people heard this evening?
The one question I would raise, Courtney, I didn't get, me personally, the sense that any of the concerns or many of the concerns raised were because schools were reopening or not. I think many of the issues were based on schools reopening was just one aspect of it. It wasn't everything, but
fundamentally what we're talking about is the isolation and the changes on the norm that have happened to kids. So I think to not frame it as
okay, fine.
And then also remember that today we're talking about the middle schools are starting to reopen now. So I do think it's also pegged, in my mind, it's pegged kind of intrinsically to the school situation.
Okay.
I'm open for conversation about that though. Julian?
Yeah, I think that's definitely tied, and I think it's a jumping off point for us to talk about that. But I'm just mindful. I know as a high school student, I'm probably gonna be the last one to return to school in person. But even when my school did offer blended learning, I'm technically enrolled in blended learning. I've only been able to really go one day. But when it did offer that blended learning experience was for a limited amount of time. And when I was in the school, the precautions in place didn't, end that isolation feeling. So I think I don't think it's sort of like there's mental health issues virtually, but when we flip into in school learning, that those go away. And I don't think anyone was trying to imply that. I'm just saying I think we need to this is a broader conversation, and I don't think this is something that's going to go away next year either. No matter where we're going, I think this is so. I think we need to talk about mental health issues separate from the reopen or close schools. That way, it's not. I think Blanche put it really well. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to suggest a vote, maybe more than one.
We have
more hands?
We do. We have Catherine and then Ira.
Well, Catherine and Ira, could I just say, is it anything radically different from what you've said before?
I'd like to make a comment if that's okay.
Make it quick, love. Please.
I forgot to lower my hand.
Okay.
So
are
you willing to work with Julian, and Julian, would you be willing to contribute to this resolution to kind of bring in, I want to make sure that the points that Julian made are,
well, it goes without saying that Julian
are centered to the resolution, and also that that in what we're recommending, the students' voices be a primary component of that, and calling on the DOE to create some sort of process to include more student voices. That's very important to me in terms of supporting the resolution. So I just wanted to clarify that would be included.
Catherine, Courtney rather, I'm sure you'll be willing to include that.
I think I already said it. So
that's what I thought. Okay.
I agree. And I think the point also about the, I mean, Arena said it too, the Council for Young People, I think we're talking about making sure that the students' voices are.
Okay, my question is, should we vote on whether we move forward with anything at all? Vote number one. Do we have a show of hands or what?
Blanche, I'm sorry, just procedurally, I'm not sure what you're asking us to do. Are you asking us to, what are you asking us to do?
I'm asking us to, let's get moving. Do we want to get anything out of this meeting in the form of communication upward and outward that would include many of the points that were raised this evening? I would then further ask, since Courtney has volunteered to prepare something, ask her to do it. If the group agrees that we should do anything, and then get this presentation around to the committee for them to say, excuse me, this covers, I agree with this, I disagree, this should be included, or this should not. Okay? That's what I'm saying.
Mark has his hand raised.
Mark?
I appear to be unmuted. How did that happen? Hope I didn't share anything I didn't mean to. So I think that what we're looking at here is a vote on a general statement that summarizes the good work that's been done tonight and leaving the specifics to Courtney to flesh out. That's the vote we can take right now. And that's the way to get this on the agenda for the March meeting instead of the April meeting. If that's what folks want to do, then that would be, you know, I mean, we can't have specifics right now about the call outs. We have to, I mean, that it's in good hands with Courtney to draft that. Blanche's idea that we should then have an opportunity to comment as a committee on it before it goes to full board is a sensible one. That's what you can vote on now. Otherwise, we're talking about floating a draft and then bringing it back to YEL in March, which would mean a vote in April. That, by the way, would still be timely with respect to getting input to our council members for the budget negotiations that really matter, which are the ones in May and June. But if you want to take action quicker than that, and I see that that there are those in the chat who think that we should, that's the means to get to that end. That's what I'd offer there.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you, Blanche, for clarifying.
So the next step would be, if we are in agreement, you should take a vote, Courtney and Blanche. You have to vote on a resolution.
Okay, all right.
I'm sorry, Steve, that's not what Mark said. I don't think we're voting on a resolution because there is no resolution. We're voting on a process.
That's right.
By which to establish a resolution prior to the full board that would be shared with the committee and voted on, or at least have some endorsement of, and that would then go to the committee. There's no resolution to vote on tonight. It sounds like, based on Mark and Blanche's description, that we're voting on a process by which to draft a resolution. Or did I get it wrong?
That's not exactly correct. What I'm suggesting is that we can vote tonight on a resolution that encompasses what we've heard tonight, but you're correct that we don't have that in front of us. So the best we can do is vote on the concepts and then be sure that by the time it gets to full board, what's on paper corresponds to what we expected tonight. And if we can't reach that kind of a consensus, then we know where we are, and it does come back.
And I would just point out that we've always done that vote. So we've never had the resolution in front of us. The framework of having a conversation, discussing it, and voting on a resolution that then would be drafted and then floated around is how we have done YEL since I've been on the board as a process.
Thank you.
Well, I move that we take a vote on that concept, as Mark put it, that we proceed and engage the process of developing a resolution along the lines of the discussion and the consensus this evening. And we can take a vote on that. because we're going back and forth with this, and I thought we were very, very clear. I have my own position on resolutions, which is strongly an obligation. And you have an obligation to share your ideas with the community. And ideas have constituencies of their own. So it could reach a clerk, it could reach a city council person. Of course, it's going to reach Gail Brewer, our strongest advocate, and it's going to reach everyone that is surrounding the circling that's happening around the Department of Education is going to read the resolution. And you're going to arm them with this board supports this, and then we partner with other boards that our ideas have a following, have a constituency. We want to reach them, and we're obligated to reach them. Very
That
important.
sounds like a motion to me, so I second it.
Okay. How do we vote with this thing that we're in front of?
Mark, you can help with the vote because you're the master host.
I'm the master host. Okay. So while there are a lot of members of HHS here, I think this is actually a YEL meeting. So why don't we take a vote of committee members and then non-committee board members. So committee members in favor of this resolution as it's been constituted, please raise any hand you have, whether it be digital or physical. So I see 6 plus me is 7, Courtney is 8. And that's all I've got. So
9.
9, okay, so 9, and those hands down, please.
You've got Paul here, and he's on the committee, so I don't.
Paul, do you have a vote?
In the chat.
You can put it in chat if you need to. I saw Paul previously recommending a resolution, so I'm hoping that that's a yes. Meanwhile, let's take a vote of no's. Anybody voting no on that resolution? And I don't see anybody. Anybody abstaining? I see 1. Anybody else? And no one is ineligible for cause. So pending Paul's vote, is that Paul? There it is. Paul's a yes. So for the minutes, we have committee vote of 10-0 to 1-0. And now for non-committee board members, please raise your hands in favor. I see 1, 2, and Stephen is 3. Oh, and Robert, okay, there's 4. Someone's got to teach me how to change the color of your digital hand. That's a really cool thing to do.
It just showed up. It's that artificial intelligence. It just showed up.
Okay, well, maybe the same gremlin that unmuted me without my knowing it.
Reaching out to Robert for advice tomorrow, I'll tell you that much. I like this style.
All right, so I've got 4. And
where's Catherine? Where's Catherine?
Catherine's a member of the committee, so she voted with the committee.
Okay.
And so those opposed on the motion, non-committee board members, I'm rushing through because I don't think there are any. Anybody abstaining on non-committee board members? I don't see any, and no one is ineligible for cause. So I have 10-0 to 1-0 and 4-0 to 0 on the resolution. Given the hour, I'm going to suggest an adjournment, but you guys can do what you want.
I have a question. When, Courtney, when will we see the resolution?
I'm gonna do it as fast as I can.
No, I'm not rushing you, but I know that the full board meeting is what, a week from next Tuesday. So, and then since I'm not familiar with this process, once everyone weighs in on the resolution, when does the committee vote on the resolution? Or was this the vote on the resolution that's presented to the board?
No, we haven't seen that yet, Irina, so we couldn't vote on that.
No, this is the vote. This is the vote.
But that's exactly what Mark and Stephen said, that this is the vote on the resolution, even though we haven't seen a resolution.
Correct. So if there isn't consensus once the draft comes around, then we'll figure out what to do next.
Got it. Okay.
Okay, but we've never had that problem before, I assure you.
Well, we have it now, okay?
New to me, Shelley, it's a new world. That's all I can say, Shelley. It's a new world.
Okay, thank you. Courtney, we'll talk about it, okay? And you'll touch base with Julian and anybody else you think you need to touch base with. And if I can help you expedite this thing, just give me a shout, okay? And Mark, also, I'm sure you'll work with Courtney on it.
Only to the extent she needs me. I'm
Oh,
available, but I
please.
have confidence.
Please, please. And okay, fine. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Any second?
Second.
We
Third.
adjourned.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night.
Great meeting.
Take
Thanks,
care,
everybody.
be well, stay well.
Thank you for a great
You're
meeting,
welcome.
Courtney and Blanche.
Yeah, it was great.
Thank you. Well done.
Good night,
Oh,
everyone.
Okay, good night all. Thank you all. And I'll talk about thank you notes to